Who should own this process? Is it something the company, or like if it's one of our clients, do we own the process? How does that work?
It is a combination of both. From an IT firm, let's say Stimulus Technologies is your IT service provider. We're going to come in, do the assessment, and provide recommendations. In the end, it's the M&A team that's going to own the process internally. So
You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Welcome to Stimulus Tech Talk. I am Sherry Lip, the marketing director at Stimulus Technologies, and I am here with Stimulus Technologies founder and CEO Nathan Whitaker. And today we are talking about something that Nathan knows a lot about on all fronts, and that is the IT concerns during a merger and acquisition. Hey, Nathan.
hey, Sherry, and welcome everybody. Yeah, this is an interesting topic because, yeah, Stimulus, we've done 7 acquisitions, and we supported 10 times that for our clients, and none of them ever go quite right on the IT side, but we learn our lessons and try to do better each time. So hopefully we can help save you from some of the mistakes that we made and help you understand what needs to happen from an IT perspective before you do any M&A activity.
Is it pretty common in the business world that these mergers and acquisitions are happening? Is it pretty frequent?
It is a lot. We've had clients on both sides, whether they're being acquired, they're merging with another similar firm, or they're acquiring other companies. And obviously our role changes quite a bit in those. Over the last year or so, to call it, 25 and 26, we've probably seen a little bit of reduction in them. There was a big flurry, 22, 23, 24. There seemed like a lot of money coming in, especially PE firms, looking to do acquisitions and buying smaller entities than what they were before. So, I think most small business owners think that, a private equity company would never be interested in them. That's $100 million a year businesses. But what we've seen is PE firms are looking down market a little bit more. And, if you're doing $2 million in revenue, $3 million in revenue, you become a little bit more attractive. And we see these roll up opportunities. And there's been a lot of, small like dental practices or CPA firms or law firms that might be small, doing, single practitioner or just maybe a few lawyers, few CPAs, that they're getting rolled up with other companies around their size and become part of a larger PE firm's investment. So we're seeing this even in really much smaller businesses than historically have happened before. Like I said, I think in the last year it's slowed down a little bit, but there's still a certain amount of activity. And then I think companies want to get a larger value. So we've seen even some of our clients merge together. We've had experiences where two of our clients that are CPA firms worked out a deal unbeknownst to us, and they merge. And then we have to deal with integrating the company into one. So there's a lot of things that are happening. Business owners are constantly looking for ways to consolidate, save money, produce better margins. And then on top of that, you have companies that were founded maybe by the baby boomer generation, that are looking to retirement, and whether it's transitioning to a new generation of owners, or selling the company to a strategic partner, potentially a competitive company, or like I mentioned, the PE firm route into a roll up. I think we're going to see this activity increase over the next few years as the baby boomer generation is looking to retire and transition out of their companies. So that's as I meet with people that are in this industry that are providing support for mergers and acquisitions, that's the word on the street, is that there's going to be a bigger flurry of activity as the baby boomers are entering their 60s, early 70s in age, that they're wanting to exit their companies that they've owned for many years.
And Gen X is right behind.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that there's a perception too that if you've, owned your business for a certain number of years, whether, I think there's a desire to maybe even retire earlier if possible than, the traditional 65, 70 years old, that you find Gen Xers that might be wanting to exit in their 50s and move on to something else, a next life, that they're not operating the business, maybe providing support, things like that. So we're certainly seeing that too. So yeah, it's interesting times in the economy.
Yes, and people can listen to our previous podcast, which is just a couple ago, where you talked with our guest about getting the business ready for that.
It's interesting. Yeah, as you mentioned in that podcast, he was saying that he's seeing a lot of people even in their 40s wanting to exit their business and do something else. And so by the time this podcast airs, I'll have been the owner and CEO of Stimulus for 31 years, and it's a long time. I still really enjoy what I do, so I don't have any, immediate plans to do anything different. But, you think about that once you've done it for a long time and what's the next opportunity and thing to do, and how do you make sure what you built over the years continues on. And there's just, there's so much that goes into that decision. And the concern I think for most business owners is how, what's the legacy of the business, and how do I make sure that the people continue on well, the customers and clients are served well. And technology is such an important part of that, because it really, the lifeblood blood of a business today surrounds technology.
Thinking about that aspect of things, because I was going to ask, what should they be thinking about in terms of IT? But if you said, we found out kind of after the fact that our clients are merging, would you prefer the person acquiring the business is approaching us?
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate part, is a lot of the times we're brought in almost after the deal is inked, and it is the wrong time. And I get it why business owners want to do that, because they're trying to keep this quiet, if they're looking to sell or merge or even acquire another business. They don't want that to get out. There's non-disclosure agreements that everybody's signing. There's limit of information that they want to share. And I get that. On the other side of it, though, there's a lot of planning that has to go in to transition IT systems. And it's certainly a lot better to start thinking about those things early on in the M&A discussion of how that transition will be, from anywhere from, what's going to happen to the domain names, or, let's say it's a merger, and you have ABC company and XYZ company.com. What's the new name going to be? And so how do we transition all XYZ company.com's email addresses over to ABC company.com? And then how do you get the data shared among the organization? Are they working on two different platforms? Maybe one company is working on Microsoft 365 and the other one's on Google, or one has an in-house server and the other one's completely in the cloud. Maybe they're working on different line of business applications. Or if you're like a dental practice and one of the systems is working on a different software package than the other, how do you transition all the charts and all that information into one system so that it's do you keep them operating separately completely, or do you transition the data and try to merge it together? And so all those questions come up, and it's better to have that well pre-planned before anything happens. But unfortunately, what happens is a lot of times, we get a call like the day after the data signed and said, "Hey, we need to merge these two companies together, and you have a week to do it." And we couldn't even plan this in a week. We need a lot more time. And so it's a little bit of hair on fire, and there's always more mistakes that happen when you try to rush things without a lot of pre-planning.
And what kind of things should be known before the acquisition is finalized? Like, what kind of problems might there be that somebody should know about?
Yeah, I think you got to do an assessment or analysis of what infrastructure each company has, and then make decisions on what you're migrating or merging those into. So, issues that come up is, maybe one company's working on older systems, expired licenses, expired software, older servers. Maybe one of the companies doesn't have the same cybersecurity posture as the other. So you have, to enforce a lot more cybersecurity, as you merge things together. Maybe one company doesn't have an IT firm. They've been, using shadow IT for many years. And so suddenly, you want to enhance the entire company with, proper documentation, proper IT management, proactive care of the systems. And that causes disruption on both companies because, there's a cultural battle between, just do it however you want to do it versus having, the proper procedures and policies in place to provide proper IT. So, if you don't pre-plan these things and ask the questions and make decisions well beforehand, then you have, this culture, potentially culture shock in the IT side of things that can come up. I mean, I think a lot of business owners, when they're going and doing mergers and acquisitions, they're thinking culture as in what the people are, but there is technology culture too that comes in of how the business operates from a technology perspective that you have to decide on. So, yeah, I mean, those are better decisions made well in advance and then planning on what you cut over when. And usually the transition, you have like first day, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days of how to accomplish the transition. So, the goal that we, try to do is provide business continuity as much as possible. And that might be just keeping the companies running on separate systems for a certain amount of time until they can merge together and operate together and come up with a plan to make that happen.
Is there one company's technology that's usually the one that you go with, or do you have to ever start from scratch, kind of?
That's a good question. So, sometimes that is what happens is you decide to go new completely. Like part of the transition is we don't like either line of business application. We're going to go with this new one. So that does happen. But more often than not, whether it's an acquisition or a merger, one IT solution usually is the one that dominates. And it usually happens that the acquirer, if it's an acquisition, they're the ones that will dictate, especially if you're a business that's getting acquired by a PE firm in a roll-up strategy, then usually the PE firm has that in place already with that anchor company that they're acquiring you with, and you're going to merge and migrate over into their systems. It's very rare that we see that they allow the acquired entity continue on with how they've been doing things. Now, that process might be, a year before that transitions, but eventually we see that transition away. So if you're being acquired by a large enterprise PE firm in a roll up, you're pretty sure you're going to move to whatever solutions that they have in place in the anchor company. So now, if you're merging, then you have to make those decisions on what lives, and it might be a smattering of both. You might say, well, we're going to use this email system, migrate the data there, but we like the line of business application that the other company's using, so we'll continue with that. Maybe the payroll systems for one, and the file access for the other. You have to make those decisions, and that's part of that pre-planning, what you should do beforehand. Again, what usually happens is, that happens after the deal is completed, and then we have to make those decisions quickly. That's really better to make those decisions before you close, but we can make them, over the few weeks post closing, so that we have a plan in place to migrate data and make those changes.
I imagine there can be some hiccups at the very least. There could be employee turnover from either having let people go or people who don't want to be a part of a merger or acquisition. So how do you deal with like admin accounts and passwords and security issues? How do you handle that?
What's becomes complicated is if there's, two different IT firms that are managing it. Let's say, I'll use this example. If one company has an outside IT firm and the other one has been using an internal IT firm, there might be undocumented information. There might be some silos that happen that, there's a clash between the IT firms. And then, like you said, there's maybe people leave, or there's data that doesn't need to be migrated, there's archival data. And how you deal with that is, I'll go back to that planning again. The outside IT firm should sit down with the internal IT team and work towards making those decisions on who's responsible for what, defining those responsibilities, and then coming up with a project plan moving forward. And working with the company executive team on making the decisions on approving the plan and who's responsible for what going forward. So, a lot of times if it's like an internal IT department that's, working with an outside IT firm on the other side, that outside IT firm might continue on with a co-managed solution that the internal IT people stay, but the other firm, provides support because it might be a much larger company now and they don't have the resources to manage, double the work that they had before. So, there's a good opportunity to work together, and that could be a long-term solution also for that combined entity rather than having to hire more people on internally. And then letting people go, you do have to be concerned about access. And I think in general, doing those audits of user accounts, admin accounts, different people that might be leaving, and, not just internal, but looking at external access, things like bank account information, maybe accounting system, line of business applications, doing a full audit of what everybody had access to and ensuring that the right people going forward have access and those old accounts go away. And I think the other thing to be concerned about is like outside vendors that might have had access to it. You might have had a consultant that worked for one of the companies at one time, and doing that cleanup to make sure that there's not vulnerabilities of the combined entity going forward.
And based on your experience or experience with stimulus, what do you think is the biggest things you've learned having done it multiple times?
I'm going to answer it again is planning beforehand. I think even internally at Stimulus, we didn't notify our internal team early enough in the initial acquisitions that we did. We kind of threw it on them and say, "Oh, we're doing this now." And or, maybe a few days before the acquisition where they could have used much more time. So I think, when you start thinking about an M&A deal, bring in the IT teams, I would say minimally 30 days before expected close. 60 days would probably be better just to do some pre-planning. And, IT guys, we're used to keeping things confidential. There's a lot of information that we could have access to that, we don't share because it's confidential information. So, I at Stimulus Technologies, all of our employees have to sign non-disclosure agreements and confidentiality agreements so that we don't share client data, what's happening. So we're pretty good about it, anyways, in general. And so don't feel afraid to share with your IT team what's happening. And then you could spend the time planning for it. And then if the acquisition doesn't happen, it's okay. You're probably going to have better IT systems in the end, anyways, because we're doing analysis of how things are operating today. And there may be some decisions that need to be made of how to improve operations, even if you don't close the merger acquisition. So don't think about it wasted time. It's a good opportunity to really understand how systems are working and how they can be improved moving forward. The other thing is you can learn from the other company too as part of the process of how they're doing things and maybe learn a few ways to do things better. So that's one of the things I've always enjoyed about M&A is you really understand how other businesses solve their problems, and it can help you make your business better, even if you don't close the deal with the other company. It's just an opportunity to just look at and improve your company overall.
What needs to happen on day one, especially when it comes to customer facing systems and customer data?
Going back to that plan is what, are you going to do an integration immediately or maybe wait and let the two companies continue operating over time? So I would say day one, generally announcements go out, but the more successful integrations that I've seen is that you let the two companies continue operations for a period of time as they were, and then you do, slow migration. So maybe the first 30 days you get your email accounts into one system so that it's, merging the two communication channels. Maybe you have your phones merged together into one system. Client facing takes a little bit more time because they might be used to doing things with you a certain way. So again, let's say I'll use the CPA firm example on this one. Let's say they have a way of sending you, confidential documents. So Now there might be a new way of doing that. So you have to communicate, new links and new information. There may be new payment methods that come in. And so you have to take that a little bit slower so that you can train the customers on how they're going to do things differently. What I've learned that happens is customers generally ignore that communication. So we've had instances that we've sent out, paper letters, email notifications included on every invoice, the new name, the acquisition, what happened. And the first time we do, charging the credit cards and it comes across as a different name, we get a flurry of phone calls and say, "Oh, I didn't know about this. Why didn't you tell us?" And it's like, well, for the last 30 days, we've been sending all this notification out to you. And they're like, "Oh, I guess I just kind of ignored it. Didn't think it was a big deal." So you run into that, clients don't read and understand what's happening. I think what business owners really should focus on is the highest priority clients and personally communicate with them, maybe a phone call, business owner to business owner, let them know what's happening. If that's, if you're especially like a CPA firm or some firm that is more relationship based, that should be communicated well between principals. But the best thing you can do is communicate as much as possible. It probably takes 7 to 10 communications before your clients or customers will realize the change actually happened. And it's usually they realize it when they get an invoice from a different company or get a credit card charge, from a different company. That's when they usually finally realize that the change has happened.
And, kind of wrapping this up, who should own this process? Is it somebody in the company, or like if it's one of our clients, do we own the process? How does that work?
It is a combination of both. From an IT firm, let's say Stimulus Technologies is your IT service provider. We're going to come in, do the assessment, and provide recommendations. In the end, it's the M&A team that's going to own the process internally. So the business owner or the operations person is going to be making these decisions and approving the plan. We can execute it, but in the end, it's really the executive team that's going to be making the decision. So my recommendation on that point is you have somebody on that team that's working through the acquisition that is responsible for the IT decisions. And again, it should be a business executive that's doing it, because there's a lot of questions that will come up that will require executive decision making as you move through this process. So don't just think that your internal IT guy or your outside IT firm is going to make all these decisions for you. These are a lot of important business decisions, and that comes down to somebody on that acquisition team that can work through that process and answer those questions and make the important decisions as things move forward.
And last question, based on your experience with this, is there anything you wish that, an owner or owners would not assume about merging two systems together?
I think that business owners think things are magic and can happen suddenly. And so business owners should realize that these processes take time and they should be thought about and planned and, be more methodical than, "Hey, I just signed a document to merge with this other firm. Can you have everything integrated tomorrow?" Which we've kind of gotten that before. So the more pre-planning that can happen and patience as the process is worked through makes for a lot better M&A transaction for both companies. So, and I think, just understanding too that this costs money to do, it's disruptive on the organization, on the employees, on the clients, on the customers. It is a disruptive process. So understand that disruption that can happen and just have patience and understanding that it's going to take some time and money to get through all of it. So those are my biggest advice. Plan as much as possible in advance, have some patience through the process, and understand that this is often a complex process, even if you're a small firm that's doing this.
All right. Well, thanks, Nathan. And if anybody is listening and maybe is maybe in this process or thinking about this process for the future, we're happy to talk about that with you. So I will put the links down in the description or how you can get a hold of us. And thank you for watching or listening.